Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining. I am Jack Schneider, Curatorial Associate here at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. I am delighted to introduce today's speakers, Martine Sims and Jadine Collingwood, with whom I had the pleasure of working with on the exhibition Martine Sims, She Mad Season 1. The show opened here at the MCA last summer and is on view through February 12th. That said, if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, you have just 10 days, and it is really not to be missed. Martine Sims is an artist who has earned wide recognition for a practice that combines conceptual grit, humor, and social commentary. Apart from the MCA, she has shown extensively, including solo exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and ICA London, among other venues. She has also done commissioned work for brands such as Prada, Nike, and Celine, among others. Sims is a recipient of the Creative Capital Award, a United States Artists Fellowship, the Tiffany Foundation Award, and the Future Fields Arts Prize. She is in a band called Aunt Sister, hosts Double Penetration, a monthly radio show on NTS, and also runs Dominica Publishing. Welcome, Martine. Joining Martine is Jadine Collingwood, assistant curator here at the MCA Chicago. Collingwood holds a PhD in art history from the University of Chicago, where she completed her dissertation, A Tragic Suburban Mentality, Managerial Lyricism in Contemporary Art. At the MCA, in addition to organizing Martine Sims' She Mad Season 1, Collingwood curated Chicago Works Caroline Kent and is organizing a survey exhibition of Gary Simmons' work with James W. Alsdorf Chief Curator Renee Morales, titled Gary Simmons' Public Enemy, which opens at the museum this summer. Previously, she worked at the Walker Art Center and the Art Institute of Chicago. So before we begin, I'd like to share my personal gratitude for both Jadine and Martine for bringing this exhibition to Chicago. A few years before I arrived in Chicago, Martine actually attended my alma mater, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and founded the artist-run project space Golden Age. And Martine, you've really made a huge lasting impact on our city's art scene. And it's been really great and special to see so many of your old friends and colleagues coming to see the show at the MCA over the past few months. So thank you. I'd also like to thank all of our generous funders, whose names you can see here. And these are the folks that make programs like this one possible at the MCA. And with that, Martine and Jadine, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Jack. Yes, hi, Martine. We are so happy to have you join us in Chicago for this show. And thank you for joining us today for the talk. I figured we would just kind of dive in and talk about the show. The exhibition brings together 5 videos that are part of this series, which is titled She Mad. And the videos actually, I think you made them over a span of over 7 years. So I'm wondering if you might start by kind of talking about the series as a whole, and maybe going into some of the early thinking that you had about the series.
Sure. First, just thank you both. Thank you, Jack, for that introduction. Very touching. I was so happy to show at the MCA Chicago because, as I've said to you before, Jadine is like a very formative institution for me and collection, and just somewhere I spent a lot of time and learned about art. So I think with She Mad, the first piece, a pilot for a show about nowhere, was I made for the triennial, the New Museum Triennial in 2015. And I was specifically kind of in the research room. And around that time, like Jack mentioned, when I left the Art Institute, I was in the film video program there, but I mean, I did a lot of other mediums as that's kind of key to it and key to my work as a kind of like hybridity, interdisciplinary practice, but I was doing a lot of these kind of performances that were kind of like making films, but I wasn't seeing them that way. Like they were sort of like essay films. They were like these lecture performances, and I was really interested in that. And so when I started working on the show for surround audience, a lot of my research was around television, and I was looking at like Devorah Heitner, who's at Northwestern and or was, I'm not sure where she is now, but that's how I first came across her work. She had done a book called Black Power TV, and I was really interested in like William Greaves. A few years ago, I did a show in collaboration with Fia Backstrom, organized around kind of his project, because I felt like he was an experimental filmmaker in the canon of all the work I was doing and learning about, but because he had sort of gone this path of public television, it wasn't included in the same way. And so I was looking at other practices like that, and I feel like there was parallels between what was happening online and just another kind of scale of making. Ulysses Jenkins is another artist who was working a lot with public television and sort of in the art world. So I was interested in this kind of like split that had happened in the United States. And so I was using the New Museum's archive. I was doing a lot of primary research. And that some of these images that are showing are from that initial research. And I began kind of evaluating my own relationship to it, but also thinking about how Instagram was probably hitting its like first kind of apex.
Yeah.
And it felt like the site in which people were projecting like what used to be in values of like television, like how we thought about family or how we thought about identity or how we thought about relationships and so on. I felt like people are kind of playing that out online and social media, and it followed these kind of like storylines. So I just started to think about, it's like an essay film that suggests the idea of She Mad. Like if I were to turn my own experience into a TV show, like what would stay and what would leave. And I feel like in some ways, and then like going through my own viewing, and it was first done as a performance. So it was kind of translated from that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and so on the one hand, the pilot is, kind of functions as a pilot, right? So it, kind of lays out this idea of a sitcom, loosely based on your kind of self-autobiography. But then it's also, as you said, like really a kind of deep dive into the history of television itself. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about like both your kind of interest in the history of television, because like, for instance, this image right here, right? Like some of the research is literally about the kind of mechanism and the object of the television, but also your kind of connection to the genre of the sitcom as well.
Yeah, with the piece, I sort of used 3 years to like orient myself. Like one was, I think 1970. Sounds right. I haven't talked about this piece in a while. Yeah. I think it was 1970, 1988, which is also when I was born. 1970 is like Mary Tyler Moore premiere, or All in the Family premiere. Basically, I traced like Norman Lear and his kind of sitcoms as being, they were like a departure from the form as it has been. And then his company, a bunch of people who worked for him, then went on to do Mary Tyler Moore, as well as Cheers, which I was really obsessed with the Cheers pilot, because in like TV land, it's kind of changed now, but that was like this canonical like example of a great TV pilot. And it's called Give Me a Ring Sometime. So that's like the Cheers. And then 1988, you kind of see the switch between something like The Cosby Show, I think premiered that year, Roseanne, and it kind of changes, like shifts who the demographic of the sitcom is, whereas like the hour-long drama becomes who is like a more upper class product on
Mhm.
in television, the way it's advertised. And the sitcom, because of that, becomes free to like other audiences. And then 2007 was the last kind of date that structured the piece, which is when YouTube launched basically, and you could then access these clips. Because prior to that, if I was to be like telling you about, oh, remember this episode, remember the show, unless one of us had like a recording of it, we would not be able to look at that. So I feel like that kind of looking backwards at these collective memories changed. And I think, I don't remember if this made it into that version, but I just remember traveling somewhere for the first time out of the country. And I went to go see one of my friends that I had grown up with and who was half Danish. And we were in Copenhagen, we must have been like 17. I think I was like 17 or something, or 18. And we started talking about like a TV show. And his friend was like, oh my God, when Americans get together, they only talk about TV. And I sort of liked that as this like shared memory. And, since 2015, I think a lot's changed, obviously. That's almost a decade ago now. But those are some of the ideas that were kind of orienting that piece.
Yeah. And yeah, so what I think so interesting is that exactly like as you've described it, like the way that you're kind of approaching like the archive of images that you're drawing on almost seems very much to be from the perspective of like an internet user, right? Where you have all of these kind of references available to you, and that kind of forms a kind of collective baseline, so that, I just saw Stringer Bell on the screen, like, those sort of references everyone kind of connects to. And
yeah, a lot of these are like some of them, like the first things was more of the TVs. Those are from the archive at the New Museum. So I was looking at 3 exhibitions. One that was called like, I don't remember. I'm not going to remember the name of the exhibitions right now, but so I'm just going to put that aside. But there was like one that was specifically about the architecture of the television and how it functioned in the living room, in people's living rooms. And they had like TVs from like the first ones to contemporary and how it shaped kind of like family life. And there was another exhibition that was more about people's relationship to TV, where they were in these confessionals, basically telling TV memories. And one of the visitors, museum visitors, you could check out a camera. You could do these TV memories, but you could also check out a camera and sort of respond to it. And one of the pieces that I use is from a guy named Art Jones. And in Pilot, these function as almost like these commercials. Art Jones is another artist who then later was my tutor in grad school. And he had never seen that footage. So I found it in the archive and digitized it. And I was like, wait, I know this guy from editing when I first met him. This is 30 years later.
Yeah.
So our first studio visit, I showed him this footage of him. And he was like, where, how, like, what is this from? But then some of these other images are more for my own saved. I'm like a pretty notorious, a lot of these are stuff I took, like this is from Laughing Gas, this photo of the boy on the bus, which I shot on the bus, and this is kind of scripts from it. So it's like a big mix of, I think like, I always want things to have that internet feeling, because I'm one of those people that puts a lot of things onto the internet.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm really interested in, so there's a point in the pilot where there's, the narrator is kind of speaking about, how the sitcom as a genre, right, kind of, opened up this lens onto kind of Black private sphere. But then at the same time, it also speaks to this way that there's really multiple meanings embedded in sitcoms. So there's the moment when she's explaining, Will wasn't talking to you. So like a lot of she's like, a lot of my white friends are like, yes, I remember that, right? So there is this kind of collective memory of that kind of experience of consuming these shows, but they're like, I didn't think it was a Black show.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always that kind of like duality, I think. And I'm wondering if if you could talk about that a little bit, and maybe if that like functions for a way in your own work, because this show, you know, actually opened first in Norway, in Bergen. So
Yeah.
kind of context, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like hard to talk about that because it's such a part of my life experience, you know, where there's like two or maybe more than two, definitely more than two things at play all the time. Um, but I feel like one thing I'm really interested in and why television kind of became in this series, like what I focused on, is because it is this sign of Blackness that gets distributed to people. And so even if this is a Facebook ad I was in many years ago that people thought was real. I think it was my daddy texting it to me. People started texting me like, Facebook's using your images. I was like, I needed money. It's not a real photo. I don't know that girl. Anyway, we were like, basically, you know, like the first day I took at Art Institute, actually, Romy Crawford's race films class. And I remember the first day of class, someone was talking about a student, a white male student, was like, I only really encountered Black people through TV. This is the first time I'm really meeting in Black people.
Yeah.
Which was wild to me, having grown up in a city and being Black, obviously. But I was like, whoa, that's an experience that someone's having.
Yeah.
And I think in Bergen, I mean, the show first was in Glasgow at Tramway, and then went to Bergen. And I'm sure there's different things that people pick up on from it or have what comes out, like in Laughing Gas, again, the first time I showed that piece, which sort of takes its inspiration from a 1907 film called Laughing Gas that stars this actress Bertha Regustus. And I was really interested in kind of, in the whole project, I try to take something that exists publicly from film or television and then combine it with a personal experience and sort of like, so in this case, another time I was in Chicago, when I was in Chicago, I got a oral surgery. I was getting my wisdom teeth taken out. And before I had been put under, they were about to start surgery. And right before they started, someone came in and said, your insurance isn't going through. And I had all the stuff and was numb and was like, oh, well, how much is it? You know, like they're like, you want to put a credit card down? And it was like way more money than I could pay. And I said, I'm good. Don't worry about it. And I just got up. I took the stuff off and I got up and I got onto the train. And I was like really out of it. And I ran into a friend on the train, but I didn't see them at first. And so then later I found this Laughing Gas film because I was really interested in transitional cinema. And Jacqueline Stewart, who's now at the Academy Museum, was at UFC for a long time. Her book, Migrating to the Movies, was another huge influence on me and in this series as well. And she was writing about this era before things were kind of codified. And this silent film kind of mapped it onto this experience I had. But when Laughing Gas first played in France, the majority of the responses were about, I don't understand. Why does she not get the surgery? What happened? This is horrific. Why would you get up? And I was like, oh, it's because you have to pay for it. And everyone was like, that's barbaric. And I was like, no, that's not the point of the video. Like that's a minor, what the situation. But outside of the United States, you know, that was like, really hard for people to process and was like, they thought it was so terrible. So those things that's what I like about kind of showing in different contexts and understanding what got translated or what shows ended up somewhere and what didn't. And yeah, you know, those things break down, but I also like them just structurally, storytelling. So like some of the images are going by that are just like photos of me. Those are all used in threat model. And I like, you know, that's what I like about like editing is, or the non-hero, which is kind of a cover of Lil Nas X TikTok, is like I like that I can kind of shape that. I think that's what I became more interested in after the first video was like, okay, how far can I push quote unquote autobiography? Because it's really not. It's like I'm literally ripping from storylines and scripts. But two people would still believe it. How can I manipulate it and play with that? Because I think that's what I have observed in image making is how the general production level of like your average person has just gone up, and they kind of taken on these like professional tools and mechanisms.
No, it's so funny. Like, actually, I don't think we've ever really talked in depth about laughing. I had no idea that piece also was based on like a real life experience. But then but then the work so there's laughing gas, and then I feel like, as the videos go on, like the kind of, that blurring of like fact and fiction, it goes much more into kind of the fictional realm. Maybe this is a good time, since we have the image up of Intro to Threat Model, to talk about that piece, which, changes, I think, also in tone. Like laughing gas is so kind of humorous and funny in a way. There is humor in Intro to Threat Model as well, but I've always, one of the things about that film is that that video is that it's actually like one of the loudest in the show. So it's one of the ones that I like hear as I'm like walking around the museum in different spaces, because it has this almost like, really kind of like primal scream to it, right? Where the character is just like yelling. But maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about that work, and maybe by starting by just like explaining what like threat modeling is.
Sure, yeah. Threat modeling is a concept I took from cybersecurity, which is a process of questions basically that identify your threats and vulnerabilities. And so from that, you can figure out what you need to protect yourself. So like a basic kind of threat modeling would be like in a room or something, like what's the access, like a door, like how you figure out to put a lock on a door. You kind of ask like, okay, what access do I need? Who needs to get into this? I need keys, I need this. It's just done in a digital space. At the time I was comparing it reminded me of cognitive behavioral therapy, actually. So I found like a lot of similarities to dealing with anxiety, and I was having a lot of anxiety personally. And that's part of the tone of that video, is like, I wanted it to have that kind of feeling. And so I was kind of thinking about, okay, that's threat modeling, right? It's like the security thing. But I also liked the idea of thinking about it like a type of modeling, like fit modeling, or fashion modeling. Like the threat model is a style of model operating in the world. And there's the word model itself is something I can kind of like tweak out on. And in that video as well, there's a 3D model of me that is functioning. So I think that was one thread. So I kind of created this character who is a threat model, and is experiencing a crisis of identity in a way. Like there's this Jennifer Egan book. Now let's see if I can find the quote. This is a quote from her book, Look at Me, which is, I'm interested in the relationship between interior and exterior, how the world's perceptions of women affect our perceptions of ourselves. A model whose appearance has changed drastically is a perfect vehicle, I think, for examining the relationship among image, perception, and identity, because the model's position as a purely physical object, a media object, if you will, she'd risen out of her slouch and was sitting up straight. a spot of red on both her cheeks, discharging words in a cannonade, is in a sense just a more exaggerated version of everyone's position in a visually based, media driven culture. And so watching a model renegotiate a drastic change in her image could provide a perfect lens for looking at some of these larger, and then the character gets cut off. And I was this is like part of a bigger project I was working on, like Intro to Threat Modeling was like the genesis of that, but it sort of fit. In looking back as we were putting together the show, I felt like the themes kind of fit in as far as that interior exterior perception. That's what I mean about like the professionalization of the high production value. Like when someone's, you look at a snapshot from like 40 years ago, it's like everyone's backlit, it's blurry, there's like a hand in the middle of it. And then you look at like, I don't know, like a 9-year-old's like birthday images today, and it's like they look like an ad.
Yeah.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That just how we kind of image ourselves is something I'm really interested in. And so I think with Intro to Threat Modeling, I'm using myself in a way, but it is the creation of this character and the split of like, I think at the time I was making it too, there was enough images of me that I had no control over, that sort of get incorporated into it and used. And this voiceover is like essentially, like the threat model would be like the voice of anxiety or something like that, like that kind of split.
Yeah. And I can't help but like think about that video where you use this kind of avatar of yourself. And then another work that's not part of the show, but that features that same avatar and that just dies over and over kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, it has like a much more kind of, it gets like really dark, I feel like in certain sense. But one of the things I was wondering about with that video is, the avatar has this shirt that says "To hell with my suffering" on it. This is a phrase that kind of shows up, I think, across multiple works. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, it's a Rimbaud poem, Mayflowers, which is it's a really beautiful poem. I'm like, again, if I have it, I'm just searching through my notes. I always think that if somebody were to hack me, I shouldn't say this out loud, maybe. I was gonna say like the notes are the thing I would be the most like, oh God, notes.
It's great though to see, like, because I feel like it makes so like the way that your mind works and the fact that like you have these on like recall where you can pull them up. It's like,
but it's basically this poem that's about nature in a way, and it's really like, it's kind of talking about like when you're in, I guess in a way it's like what's the phrase? It's sort of sad, there's a melancholic element to it, but it's talking about how it's sort of a love poem and it's also in love with the sublime and nature. And there's a line about it that's basically like, to hell with my suffering. I'm going to like still keep these other things. It's written much more beautifully than that sentence I just said. But yeah, I found it actually in a horoscope. Rob Bresney, who is like a West Coast legend, his horoscopes were like syndicated on here. Free Will Astrology, many, many, many years ago. Like it was in my horoscope, and then because that poem really struck me. I mean, I love poetry, and that's maybe apparent through a lot of my work. There are a lot of from the structure to the kind of writing to direct references, in other pieces as well as that one. Yeah, so I just looked up this poem and it's been kind of this like guiding, it's like one of my favorite poems. And I think that phrase, "to hell with my suffering," I don't know, I kind of like it as like a mantra in a way. I think it can get the meaning of that can get misinterpreted at times. It doesn't mean that there is no suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean that there is no pain, because I do differentiate between suffering and pain in the Buddhist tradition, basically. But it just means that I'm not going to suffer, and that's like a thing I orient, and I'm really interested in characters, film stories where people find a way, and that's like a guiding principle, I think, for me. So especially in the video Dead that you mentioned, Dead, DED, which does feature this kind of avatar of me dying 7 deaths, but it's on a loop, so kind of endless dying. Yeah, it's also wearing this "to hell with my suffering" shirt. So I think that kind of maybe paradox of like experiencing great pain, acknowledging great pain, but also continuing to like go on, because the model still gets up, it still continues. I don't know, I kind of think in a way that's how I feel about life.
Yeah.
Like it keeps going until it doesn't, and then who knows what happens. I think it keeps going even then. So yeah, that's what the phrase means to me, I guess, in some way. Maybe I'll watch this later and be like, oh, I said that wrong, but that's how I feel today.
No, I think it's beautifully put. Yeah, maybe we can then pivot a little bit, since we're talking about modeling. Good
segue.
Perfectly segued. But so this is actually one of the moments that's based on a real life experience, that I'll let you describe. But basically what I want to know is, what was Tyra like?
Oh wait, can I find here? Wait, I have a secret treat.
Okay.
I was like, I can't actually tell if this is showing.
Oh my gosh. So that's oh my gosh. Wow.
Because I can't see myself on here. Show the selfie. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, this is me at age 12, or somewhere around there. I went to a camp called T-Zone. My mother worked at a nonprofit called the Birthing Project. And this call was put out to all these nonprofits looking for at-risk youth. And my mom was like, "You're gonna apply." And I said, "I don't like."
She was like, "You're at risk."
Yeah, I was like, "I don't want to do that. That's terrible. I'm not into that." And she was like, "I'm not asking you. I'm telling you." And then I got in. I got into T-Zone, and it was like a week-long sleepaway camp in Santa Barbara. And I don't know, we had this one night that was an exercise that I later learned, like as a kid, I was just like, what the fuck is going on? But I later learned that this was some kind of like modality where you, in a group, we split everyone up into their racial groups, and then you say like, I would say a stereotype about Black people, and then I would go to another group and say a stereotype about their group. I don't know what purpose it was supposed to accomplish, but as a 12-year-old, it felt like really weird to me. And it's just something I had been wanting to make a piece about. And I think, yeah, I like, because I said, like, I like the idea of mixing the memory and the make this one. So that episode, Bitch Zone, I wanted to kind of try and shoot it the most like TV style. Like, so in a way it's like even more subliminated, where we're really like using a different method of production. A lot of the earlier other videos and a lot of my work, I kind of go back and forth between the way I shoot them, like what cameras I use, how I crew it, what the edit is like, and this one I kind of wanted to try and make like really straightforward, like look like it could be on TV or something, and we like printed it to tape afterwards, so it has the like 3:4 aspect ratio and the colors like that way. And an amazing actor, Jesse Hoffman,
Yes.
plays Tyra Banks, and well, BBQ. We all had nicknames, so
Yeah.
scratch that. BBQ.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It was really fun to make, and it was like a fun, every time you're like on set, what I love about it is it kind of like starts to emulate the feeling of whatever you're faking. So
Mhm.
if we're all on set pretending we're at camp, it's like
Yeah.
suddenly that day feels like camp. And when I remade it, I didn't want to do the like slur thing. Like in my actual experience of it, it kind of did just turn into this weird like race war thing. And I was interested in trying to abstract that some. So I was like, gave the actors explicit instructions not to say any slurs and not to say, and to kind of come up with something weirder. So the way that we were like shooting it, we were kind of in the round, and it was shot by Ryan Marie Helfant, who's an incredible cinematographer. He just worked on this film Earth Mama that was at Sundance, some other friend made, and we were sort of shooting it like in this circle, so everyone was like, someone would say their line, and then we'd whip pan to have someone else respond. And I was kind of playing also with tropes of like horror and some of the way that it was shot, with the lighting cues, with the sound. And Cristello Yuri, who stage name Crystal Mess, is like a artist. Well, yeah, Crystal Mess like DJ name, but she also is an artist. She did the score with me. And yeah, it was a fun project. I think like trying to capture that experience and just have, but like heighten it, like really heighten the experiences of it.
Yeah.
And this idea of like, you're saying like the model, that was like the link in my head. So I'm happy to hear you say that transition, because that was kind of like how I was seeing it. It's like another example of these ways of being or ways of presentation. And then obviously like some people asked me if it was a modeling camp. It was not. It was like a women's empowerment camp. But obviously there was like specific ways we were thinking about femininity, womanhood, identity. It was very mixed racially. It was, yes, exactly. It was supposed to be at risk. And that was even amongst like the campers, that was a thing of like, what does that even mean? Do I identify with this? Do I not? And then subsequently for several years, actually, there were these groups. So we would meet with each other, and go to like a WNBA game, or like when she had a TV show, go to the TV show. There were like these kind of like, seminars like every quarter or something, and everyone was in communication with each other for quite some time. I probably lost touch around college. So it was this interesting just experience in my life.
Yeah, one of the things that really struck me that I think the work taps into is exactly like you're saying, this kind of like self-fashioning of an image, and you kind of see this BBQ character kind of fashioning themselves as a kind of kind of self-help woman's empowerment guru. And there's like a moment in that video where BBQ is talking about like kind of body positivity, right? And then it says like, oh, like the thing that I hate the most about myself is my ankles. That part just like hits me. It's like such a pathos of like telling a room full of like means that like you're insecure about your ankles, which seems so like non-consequential, but yeah, there's like a kind of another level, I think, of like self-fashioning going on in the work. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, and that was kind of, I sort of smashed up all my memories of that, but I'm pretty sure that was the insecurity that was shared. And I being, yeah, like a tween,
Yeah.
there were some other things I was feeling insecure about.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you're a model, like shut
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Well, maybe that brings me a little bit to talk about the last work in the series, the non-hero, which is based off of this series of TikToks released by Little Nas X. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what interested you in the kind of original series of Little Nas X, and then about the work?
Yeah, I don't know if I really like these videos. They crack me up when I see them. I think that like TikTok maybe still hasn't quite. I think it's just hitting now that the tropes of it will be clear. But I feel like similarly, each of these formats, whether it's a sitcom, whether it's an Instagram feed, whether it's like these self-fashioning and self-presentation, always they have a style, and they have like, and I'm really interested in, with this series, I was really wanting to like play with each of those mannerisms and ways of storytelling. And so this one, I don't remember how I first saw it. I love Lil Nas X, so that's probably why I'm following him, or why I was following him. And I made a drawing of him. I just found him to be like, I met him once, and I showed him the drawing on my phone, and I was like, I really want to give you this drawing.
Oh.
And I don't know. I just think that I'm interested in him also because, he started, Old Town Road was like this kind of viral strategizing, but also he started originally as a Nicki Minaj like fan account, like meme account on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think why I am drawn to him, what I find interesting about some of his output as far as cultural production, especially Black culture production on the internet, memes, Black Twitter, all that, Vine, whatever, is that like he really understands that. He used that not only to stand Nicki Minaj, but then to like create the song, create his career. Like he understands like how what kind of imagery and the combination of things people want to see. So I felt like when he started doing these life stories or my life story videos, they were just really popular, and they kept coming up. They kept coming up in conversation. They kept coming up in my feed. And but I was really just interested in like the format, and like I think TikTok compared to Instagram, let's just say, and I'm really not like on social media a lot, so I'll say that caveat. But the difference is that like Instagram is more this image of perfection. That's why I compare more to like a sitcom or something like that, or TV or movie. It's like this aspirational thing. It's like you're presenting like although yes, in recent years people are crying on it and stuff, but mostly it's kind of this veneer.
Mm-hmm.
Where TikTok is a little more authentic,
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea of it. And so I found it amazing that somebody who was having this great success, which I could also recognize, was also like struggling throughout the whole time. And there's what you see and there's what you don't see. But there's like the Radiohead song on it that's kind of like sentimental and like emo, and it's kind of talking about these challenges. So I kind of just wanted to make like a one-to-one cover, which is something I've done before, like the Mundane Afrofutures Manifesto that I did in 2013 is a cover basically of Clarion West, like 2005 Mundane science fiction manifesto. And I find it to be, I don't know, a method I like to employ related to copying, to bootlegs. I love a bootleg, whether that's like an object, a video. I like trading stuff like that. Also in Chicago, I used to buy a ton of weird bootleg videos and footage. There's so much cool stuff around, whether it's at like Maxwell Street or other places. And yeah, so it's like a method I like to use and see what changes and see what stays the same. So I just edited, try to make like, I try to stay as close to his text as possible though. Which was people, it's funny then when I shared like the first cuts with just like friends who know me very well. And they were like, when did you get dropped by your label? When did this happen? I was like people are just like, oh, this is sad. And I was like, it's not real. It's not me. Like this is the exact same thing. But that's kind of what I like about it in the continuing of this kind of character, like, you know, Jerry Seinfeld, the person, to Seinfeld, the character. I think that's what She Mad is kind of about. It's like playing with my own I don't know. My mind just went blank from my own like existence in a way.
Yeah, no, it's really funny when I think when we were like installing that work, you know, some of the installers were like, it's so great to kind of get to know like the artist before they, you know, come for install. And I was like, well, this is like actually exactly, and it's really, even more now that I've looked at it and I've looked at like the frames like side by side. That like how like deeply it is like a copy of that framework of the original. But yeah, that kind of like moving between kind of the autobiographical and the fictional, I think is something that's really present throughout the series.
Yeah, and I also want to say that doesn't mean it's not true. Like, you know what I mean? When I'm playing with it, like I like this phrase from Margot Jefferson that she calls fact and trouble. You know, she uses this to describe memory in her memoir Negroland, but like this idea that even your own memory, how you remember it, is not necessarily the truth, though it is true. And Kevin Young has a similar kind of framework in his album, the Gray Album, where he talks about truth, like TROOF. And I think I'm really interested in that, like that I could copy this Lil Nas X thing. Someone could watch it, but they are getting something about me. And I think even when I talk, you know, I did a screening at Conversations at the Edge a few years ago where I played I know I played Pilot, maybe I played Laughing Gas, but someone in the audience was like, the title of the evening was called The Unreliable Narrator. And someone was like, you, like, this is all true and this is you, and you're like, you are a really sweet person and I don't know why you're denying it. And I was like, oh, thank you. But no, I was like, I'm not denying anything. I'm just saying, I can tell you, I can use fiction. Like that is what filmmaking is. That's what I'm interested in about it, is that I can use these kind of storytelling. I can use these tropes. I can use this to get to some kind of truth. And that's what I'm really interested in, you know? It's like, I do feel what an avatar having the hell with my suffering on its back and me kind of joking in a way that I am, but that was how I was feeling at that time about a public perception and my own sense of self. There was a split that was happening. And I think in a way, this project maybe was a way, like when I'm looking at it now that it's all up and I can reflect on it, it's like maybe it was a way, honestly, of processing some of that.
Yeah, the way that you put it is so kind of beautiful in a way, because I think it speaks to, you know, I think we're always kind of, there's like this, you know, societal anxiety about like these things like social media, like, oh, that's like such a, you know, it's just fakery, or you're just curating. your life, but it's kind of like, no, that is like, like that's something that like is almost human, right? This kind of like self-fashioning of your past and your memory, that we're already always doing and negotiating, that gets heightened maybe with social media, but it's it's the way that
Yeah.
we relate to the world. So.
And I think it is like a very contemporary problem. No one has ever been perceived by this many people who's not a celebrity, like your average, like I had a cousin who was like very viral on the internet. He was like 13. He had all these followers, hundreds of thousands of followers. Yeah, that's gonna fuck somebody up. It's like that, just being perceived in that fashion. We did not have that before. And so what that does individually, collectively, societally, we don't know. And I don't think it's better or worse. It's like you're saying, like you can look at back to the Great Migration, when people moved to Chicago or moved here or moved to New York, and there's like Van der Zee studio where they took these photos that they went and sent back to their family. In reality, they were working a shit job. They were tired. It sucked. They were sharing a room with God knows how many people, but that's not what they put in the photo that they were going to send. And I think that, like, does that mean they were a liar? No, I think that's a oversimplified way of reading it. And I'm not interested in one way or the other. I'm kind of interested in all the complexity about how we self-present and and what it means. What does it mean to be like, I'm gonna take a really glamorous photo of myself, even though like I feel terrible, and like I'm not gonna pretend that I think that's like a revolutionary act. I don't think it is, but I still think it's interesting and it's part of human behavior. And I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the way people do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe now seems like perfect timing with the slideshow, but I'm wondering if you can maybe speak a little bit about the installation itself and kind of walk us through what's there.
Yeah. Well, continuing on this kind of interior, exterior, private, public, I think that's how I came to the language of the studs in a way, and also wanting. A few years ago, I started using, it's in here actually, that see-through LED screen. I like the way that looked because you can quite literally like see through the image. It also provides like an alpha channel of transparency. So depending on your blacks to whites, you can create these kind of layers, which is something I'm always interested in, I guess, you could call it collage or on a room kind of level and what your sightlines are. The studs are how you build a wall, and we didn't drywall them. We kind of use them as a way of hanging things on. They become a structure. They become a sculpture. And the color purple for me has functioned for many years as sort of this indication of like almost like secular spiritual split. And I like to think of the screen, the light, as that kind of spiritual, like a techno spirit. And so throughout the image, there's the 5 videos we mentioned. There's also 2 large format photo prints, as well as selection of other stills that kind of go. I think another thing I've been thinking of for many years is the concept of on screen versus off screen. If you think about it theatrically, like off when someone's off stage, but in an exhibition, like in a video, I can have a voice, or I can use that to like transition in an exhibition. What there is really no like off stage. And I think that's some tension I like to push formally in the way I make images, is what is like the front and what's the back, what is like should be included, shouldn't be included. And so I think that was like a guiding principle when I was thinking about all the images I wanted to include in that. And there's also these chairs, which are also kind of a cover. They're oh my God, I'm gonna forget. My brain, I'm not feeling well, so my brain is just like, but you guys can figure it out. I know you're all smart, but the chair is called Auntie Chairs, and they kind of feature these Franz West. I think it's Franz West has an uncle chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, I just saw one of those recently, like in a collector's house, and I was like, "Is this like a Martine chair?" They're like, "No, it's a
Yeah.
Franz
No, it's mine is the auntie, and mine also feature kind of like text, poetry. I think that's the gist of the show.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the photographs? Because there's like this tension between I think the analog and the digital that I've never been able to resolve in terms of like how they were taken. But yeah, maybe like at a technical level, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think I'm not going to reveal my trade secrets,
Okay.
but one thing I like to do with all my images is make the time very imperceptible. So it's unclear like how they were made, when they were made. I think, obviously it's not like that complicated to go from digital to film back and forth, but I think a lot of the post-processing that I do, kind of how I was describing the bit zone where we print it to tape, we shot on like an Arri and then like we print it to tape. Then it's like the way I did the color. I work with the colorist Caitlin Bottistelli a lot at Ethos, who is amazing. And I've worked with her on many projects, both art projects and also film. Like she did the color for the African Desperate film I released last year. And yeah, I just color, format, like those things are really important to me in terms of material of the image. And it's kind of like what you are playing with when you're working with both still and moving images. So I think in the same way they orient you, they set a time frame. So if I'm show you and I think this is actually really clear with digital images, like if I show you a photo that was taken on like a power shot in like 2008, it's like you will know it was 2008. Images did not look like that 2 years later, a year later, and they did not look like that the previous year. So there's a kind of like specificity with that I like to use, and rephotographing things and kind of like I think that's part of the cohesion in a way.
Yeah. And now like the kids, they're apparently into like the 7 megapixel
Yeah.
photographs. So it's
I know.
a date and a time to it.
Yeah, exactly. Like now that is, I saw someone the other day with a little power shot, like one I used to have when I had like a photo blog. And I was like, whoa, I'm getting old. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's something I've been interested in. Even when I was a student at Art Institute, I was like really interested in using everything from like 16 millimeter to, whatever cameras were available, as well as stills. And even growing up, I kind of got into photography through my dad. Just had all these cameras around, and then lomography was really popular. And the first films I started making were all Super 8, which was, in the late 90s, 2000s. So it wasn't like the type of thing people were using. I was interested in that format, and I would kind of make almost like period. I digitized a lot of stuff during the pandemic, like very early films, and I was like just laughing at all the things that I was making my friends do. And like I appreciate them all still.
Very nice. Yeah, well, maybe this is a good time to kind of open it up to questions. If you'd like to ask questions, feel free to put them using the Q&A kind of function at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to throw them in to the chat, and we'll take a few. I'll start off with one, just wondering, what are you up to right now? You have had so much going on. What are you excited about right now?
Hard question,
Sorry.
Jean.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. I thought that was like a softball.
My chi is quite low at the moment. I don't know. Honestly, I really don't know. I'm kind of like, I'm working on a show that'll open in LA in June, or I'm working on it, meaning like thinking about it, thinking about. Sometimes I feel like I kind of have to be like, what is an exhibition? Like, especially after the past few years has just been really intense, obviously, because there was a delay, a world changing event we all went through that I won't belabor. That was a lot of death, a lot of grief, a lot of renegotiating of everything. And I feel like because I had so much projects like right from when it opened, I'm kind of like, okay, what is it I want to make now? And also finishing this film, which was a really extremely large project. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just excited about writing, honestly, in a way, and draw. I've gotten very base level. Just being in my studio is really nice, and kind of just getting back to some base impulses. And that I'm in an acting class right now, which I've taken before. I really like doing it for directing and working with people and meeting performers. So that's one thing I'm extremely excited about. I think I'd like to continue working with actors. Like, that's opened up a real dimension for me since I think like 2017 was probably the first video I made where I was like working with other actors, mostly because of resources and in a way. And I think the more and more I do that, the more that's like giving me a whole like range of depth and richness to like work with and play with and understand how to do that. And also my own performance, I think like I really stopped doing like these performances like I was telling you.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in doing them again because there was something very like concrete and immediate about them that I enjoyed, and that was really generative. So I'm trying to figure out what that will look like. So that's what I'm excited about. The acting class has been kind of my studio time at the moment.
Yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the feature-length film, because the acting is actually really, really good in that film. That was one of the things that I really enjoyed. I think a lot of us probably here have seen it. It was at the Circle for quite some time, but
about
it.
Yeah, The African Desperate came out last fall. Distributed by Mubi. It's still streaming on Mubi and other streamers as you need. And it follows a character named Palace Bryant, who's played by an artist, Diamond Stingley, who's based in Chicago. And Palace, kind of, it's her last day of grad school. So we start at her final critique and we end the next morning back home. And in between is adventures ensue.
Very good. Okay, so we do have a question in the chat now. Might need a clarificatory, but it says, what was the process with designing the shirt with the clothing company Brain Dead?
Oh, very simple process. Brain Dead is a brand and actually cinema here in Los Angeles that's run by a few people, but Kyle Eng is one of my friends. I've known him for a long time. And we just released a shirt that's available on Brain Dead and Mubi that is like an African Desperate shirt. It's a cool design. The process was really straightforward because I actually used to work with Kyle a long time ago at this like startup, and Ibti, who Ipti Obersam is the the head of marketing at Movie. So initially I just knew, and Braindead is where we had our first premiere, like our friends and family, and they also let us use the theater just to preview. Like when you first get the film, you get DCP and you kind of have to watch it somewhere in an actual theater. And honestly, the homies at Braindead are who like let us see it before we could make any edits.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to do something with them. I love what they do. They're really good friends. They're like, I feel like a pillar of the kind of community here in Los Angeles. And it was really straightforward. They were down when we went through a couple iterations of the design, like very minor. And a couple months later, it was released. And that's how I like to work with people, honestly.
Yeah.
Ease.
Yes. So you are also you work a lot. I don't mean this to be like the moment where you like plug everything, but you can. But yeah, you are working a lot as a designer. You're doing kind of, like.
Yeah, I mean, I worked as a designer. That was my day job from the time I graduated Art Institute till a few years ago. And so I worked in music, I worked in fashion, I worked for brands, clothing companies. I guess that's fashion. There was one other thing I'm forgetting. But yeah, that was my job. So, and it's obviously a big part of my art. Like, I'm still very interested in typography, in line, making custom type. I think design can be so connected to how the ephemeral and like how we experience, like the way I talk about photography, like that specificity. I think design can be the same way, where you look at something and you're like, oh God, that was like 2007, or like, oh, that was like that era. And I feel like it comes into play a lot. I also just like to make merch. I think that's the punk band person in me. And so I love to make a t-shirt, a sticker, a hat, whatever. I have a hat I made. My avoidant hat. I made all the attachment styles, but these are no longer for sale on the internet, but maybe they will be again one day. But I don't know, it's just another, it's like very quick. It's like the way I get an idea out. I'm very pro like externalizing stuff. So I kind of just like vomit out ideas constantly. It's like that. But working with Barbara Caston, I actually remember being like, whoa. I used to work in her studio for a couple of years with her really closely. And I remember being like, oh, so you just like put the image up on your wall and you don't like share it immediately? And she was like so horrified by the idea that I like share because at the time I did have like a blog. So I was like, pretty much everything I would immediately put out. And I think working with her, I was like, oh, that's cool. You just like think about it. So there's stuff that I like don't show for a long time. And then there's things like a hat or these other things that it's like a way of me to get the idea out of my head and then I can see it. That's what I like about the acting class. It's like I'm writing something, I can see it. And then I'm like, okay. Or like how I was describing Intro to Threat Modeling. I was working on a bigger AI piece that used this kind of threat model. And I made this video to just start to see the idea outside of my head.
Yeah, very nice. Well, I'll kind of do one last call for any questions. Feel free to use the Q&A function. I love what you said about typography, because the She-Mad for me is just so specific to like a kind of like 1990s like kind of like Black Afrocentric kind of style that I think it really taps into, and even the color too, the purple, just
Newland grotesque. It's like a Dutch Afrikaans typeface, but that did get in the early 90s just like slapped on everything
Yeah.
Afrocentric, you know, all the like I remember having a copy of Native Son that was in Newland. And so
Yeah.
it's very tied to that for me.
All right, so if there aren't any, is there, there might be a question coming in. Okay, no others. All right, so if there aren't any more questions, I just want to wrap it up and thank you so much, Martine, for spending time
Thank
with
you,
us
Janine.
today. And yeah, if you haven't seen the show or if you want to see it a second, third, or fourth time, please come back. It's open till February 12th. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you.